What's up, and welcome to another edition of the Cover 2 Recap. I'm Edward Lewis, publisher of BruinSportsport.com. This is Joey Kaufman, the UCLA beat writer for the OC Register, and we're here today giving a special edition of the Cover 2 Recap. Joey, big news this week. Myles Jack, UCLA's best player, is done for the season, out 4 to 6 months with a torn meniscus. Did it in practice yesterday. Joey, tell me what you saw from Jim Moore's press conferences these last 2 days and what you think of this whole Jack injury.
There wasn't much clarity yesterday. Today he came over and began his press conference kind of walking us through what happened. It was during a 7-on-7 drill yesterday. It was a non-contact play. I presume the knee buckled or something. It wasn't on a hit or anything. The recovery time is interesting because when he said it was a significant injury, I think people assumed it's an ACL tear, an MCL tear, some significant ligament damage, but it's not. It's a meniscus tear. Still, he said that the knee has to be stitched, which takes the longest recovery process, and it's going to take 4 to 6 months. I'm not a doctor either, and I probably should call somebody who is, but it seems a longer timeline than maybe you would have expected because Scooby Wright had a meniscus tear. He may be playing in this game all of a sudden. There are other guys who come back from meniscus tears quickly, so we don't quite have the full details on why it's taking so long other than it's being stitched, which apparently makes it a longer process.
The way Jim Moore explained it was they had really 3 options for the knee. One was to just let it go, and apparently that was an issue because Myles could not straighten his knee out, so that was out. The other is to snip it, I guess, to relieve the pressure of the ligament or the cartilage inside of the knee, and he said that was an option. So really their only option was to stitch it. And from what I gathered on that, a lot of people either just play on the injury or they get it snipped, and that's why they're able to come back so quickly, like Scooby Wright, and guys in the NFL are coming back this weekend from it, actually. So, 4 to 6 months, though, it seems like an awful long time. I mean, we asked Jim, could he possibly come back? What did you think of Jim's reaction to that?
I think he brought up a good point. You see it with a lot of times when a player's coming off an injury and they give a really kind of optimistic timetable. Let's say he'll be back in 2 months, and it's really a 2 to 6 month window, and it's on the back end of 6, and the player's rehabbing as it's just past 2 months. Then people are upset and they're saying, "Oh, this guy, does he want it? Is he working as hard?" So I think it puts a lot of undue pressure on the player. So I think it's probably a nice thing for Myles that there's not a lot of pressure for him to come back, and they're not going to try and speed this up to playing 2 games at the back end of the season. So I think that's why they're probably doing that, because they don't want him, or we're going to try and save him for the bowl game. I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on him.
Now, obviously, the next question is he ever going to play at UCLA again? And we asked Jim that today, and Jim said, well, I don't know. We've got to have this conversation. He said, right now, though, I don't want to have that conversation with Myles and his mom. It's just not a conversation that needs to be had. He's got a devastating knee injury, and he's done for the season, can miss his junior year and all that. So, what did you take from his answer, and what do you think is going to happen with Myles going forward at UCLA?
Well, I think he's right. You don't need to have the discussion now because the recovery process hasn't started. There's no strong need to make a decision today. You can make it in November or December, and they'll be able to sit down and have that discussion eventually, and especially when you know more information. I think probably the odds are that he's certainly going to declare for the draft. This is a guy, I talked to an NFL draft analyst last night, and he was saying that Jack's probably a top 10 pick. Outside linebackers aren't generally taking the top 10 guys away from the ball, but he has that kind of athleticism where he could be. If not, he's still a first-round pick. So if you've already suffered one knee injury and you still got a chance to be a first-round pick, it's hard to say no to that.
All right, and I read an article the other night, actually, that I was comparing him. It was an analysis piece on who does he compare to. They asked NFL executives, who would you take, or who does he compare to? And a lot of it was Navarro Bowman's and John Beeson's. I mean, guys that are really, really good at football. So this is a guy that's, like you said, a top 10 talent, a guy that, I think has played his last down here at UCLA.
I think also coming off, as we saw last year with Todd Gurley, coming off one knee injury is not significant. Gurley had an ACL tear in November, still was taken 10th overall, didn't work out for any teams, and still was able to rise. But you saw with Marcus Lattimore, a guy who had 2 knee injuries in college, gets taken much later in the draft, ends up retiring early. I think when an NFL team sees a guy with 1 knee injury, it's not as much of a hurdle as a guy with 2. And it's a much easier, you don't worry about the injury history as much with 1 injury.
The fact that it's not an ACL, I think, is huge as well. I mean, a meniscus is a meniscus, and it's not, a whole knee replacement. So going forward for UCLA this year, though, who replaces him in the lineup? Obviously, Isako Savainea played incredibly well for Kenny Young this past weekend, but how do you think this lineup shakes out without Myles going forward?
I think they're going to have to be a lot more multiple, and they already are more multiple, but you're not going to be able to just replace him with Jayon and Isako, because what Myles really brought was he was able to get up close to the line of scrimmage, be really physical against the run. He's 240 pounds, but he's also a guy you can move over to a slot receiver and he can stick on a guy. I mean, he held Nelson Aguilar, who was first-round pick of the Eagles this year from USC, 3 catches for, was it 28 yards. I mean, there's just no linebacker who can plug in and do what he can do. So they're probably going to use Isako and Jayon to help against the run. Both of those guys are pretty capable in that. Isako had 14 tackles last Saturday. Jayon had 9. They're big guys. They can get up. They're physical. But they're going to have to run a lot more nickel, and I think that's the return of Ish is going to help with that. And Ish will probably still be at that nickel corner. He'll be used to cover guys in the slot. And he was pretty good in that last year. Pro Football Focus came out yesterday and said that Ish gave up 0.74 yards per cover snap, which was best on the team. And it was 0.7 in the slot. So having him back is big.
Now, getting into Fabian Moreau's injury, the other season-ending injury that they had this week, he broke his foot, I guess, a Liz Frank injury. It's the arch of your foot. He's also going to miss the season. Jim Moore said he'll probably be back for his senior year as opposed to Myles, who probably won't. But how do you see them kind of fixing his situation? Who do they put in for him? I know you mentioned Ish comes back, but probably playing the slot. Who's going to come in for Fabian on that defense?
I would imagine it'd still be Denzel Fisher, who played a lot for him last Saturday's game against BYU. Obviously, they targeted him a ton. He was Pro Football Focus said he was targeted 10 times. He gave up 8 completions. So he's a young, green freshman that they're going to go after. An option would be to move Randall Goforth over to corner and play some corner, and you could stick to Han Goodman at that safety spot, which I imagine they may try it out for a few series and see how it works. But they're probably going to try a lot of different things and kind of see what sticks. I mean, Deion Hollins put it pretty well yesterday when he said they're going to have to replace Myles by committee, and there's really no other choice but to do that.
So you have all of that. Jim Moore seemed pretty downtrodden in this post-game interview. He seemed like he was getting his team to really rally around this whole drama of the week and this whole poor week at UCLA. So what do you make of this going into Arizona? How do all these injuries and all this emotions change this weekend's game for you?
To me, it doesn't change the psyche that much, because I think you have a case where Myles gets hurt, Fabian gets hurt a lot. Obviously, they're their teammates. They're upset by that, but it's still an opportunity for them to play. I mean, guys, these are all competitive guys. They come here to play. They're going to have a chance to play Saturday. I don't think they're going to be kind of, woe is me. They're not going to kind of be sad and, oh, man, I miss Myles. I mean, certainly they do to some degree, but it's also an opportunity for them. They were highly recruited guys. It's an opportunity for them to step in and play. I don't think CLA is going to miss Jack from the psyche point.
That'll wrap up our coverage out here at UCLA. As always, you can follow Joey's coverage of UCLA on Twitter at Joey R. Kaufman. You can follow me on Twitter at Edward_Lewis. Until the next time, thanks for tuning in to the Cover 2 Recap.